Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know when you're gonna watch this, but it's Monday night. It is Monday night, November the 7th, and it is the day, the evening, the eve of this election 2022. And I thought, as we have been doing these last several weeks, we've been talking about this election season, been talking about it within the context of our national struggles, the issues of our day. We've been talking very, very local. I believe politics starts with the local. And so we've been doing that. And tonight, I wanted to bring together a group of brothers to me who and can we call tonight the gathering of the prophets? The gathering of the prophets. These are if you've seen me in a group, you'll find me in this group gathered with some of these folk who are here with us. Let me introduce these brothers, and then let's get at it. Let's chop it up a little bit. Hailing from Waterbury, Connecticut, the pastor of the Long Hill Bible Church, our brother down there in Waterbury, Pastor Rodney Wade. Greet the folks, brother. Greet the folk. Let me get this turn. Wait a minute, turn that mic on.
Yeah,
there we go.
Thank you, sir. Bishop, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here to share with you all. We're excited to chop it up and just have a relevant conversation with all of the folks who are in the room tonight. Certainly, it's always a pleasure to be hanging out with you, and so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
My brother from another mother, from the Unitarian Universalist Society East. I'm gonna just tell y'all a secret. If I wasn't pastoring the church I'm pastoring, if I wasn't in the denomination, as my grandmother would have called it, denomination I'm in, I probably would be tiptoeing through the tulips with the Unitarian Universalists. Then one of the secrets is I don't have to necessarily preach from the Bible. That's another subject. That's another thing. Our brother, our friend, our colleague, a person of faith and a follower of Jesus. Anyway, Reverend Josh Pollock, the senior minister of the UUSC, as we call it. Greet our people tonight.
All right. Well, thank you, Bishop, for that introduction. It's great to be with you. It's great to be with all my sibling clergy and having this important conversation. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack about preaching from the Bible, not preaching from the Bible, all that good stuff. So good to be here.
Absolutely. Let me also introduce my brother from the West Coast. Now, of course, he's from Philly originally, so he can't really claim that West Coastness, but he done been out there long enough, and it's a lot of Birkenstocks and Birkenstocks and khaki, out there in the Northwest. There's some nice people in the Northwest. Like some of them people, good friends of mine. And of course, my brother, a brother, two or three sisters, some siblings are out there. But my brother, indeed, Dr. Edward Donaldson, he's the pastor of Kingdom Family Worship Center. He is also the director of the doctoral ministry program at Seattle University School of Ministry and Theology. Brother, come on in the room. Come on in the room and greet the peoples.
Good evening. It's so wonderful to be on the line with all of you siblings and co-laborers in the gospel. And it's really a powerful moment in our history and the trajectory of our nation and really in our global village. So I'm just excited to be in this conversation with all of you justice warriors.
And last but not least at all, and probably the giant among us. Let me say that. Probably the giant among us. He's laughing already. I know he's laughing already. He's my brother indeed, and in so many reasons, both spoken and unspoken. My partner in this work here in Connecticut. He hails from Los Angeles, California. He won't never let you forget it. He's the Southern California. baby, but got roots in Mississippi and down south. You know, just the Peoples is from down south. But he is for almost 3 decades. He's been the senior pastor of the Mount Airy Baptist Church in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Come on in the room, brother Anthony Bennett. Come on in the room.
Hey, my brothers. Always good to see you all. Bishop, now, if I go to my Baptist roots, I would say about what you said, it's too close to Sunday, Doc. You shouldn't be lying like that on a Monday, Doc. Too close to Sunday. I'm just glad to be one in the number of some great brothers.
All right. No, you're the giant among us. Your reach is far greater than many of us. So what I wanted to do tonight, I wanted to have some real conversation and talk spiritually if we can. I mean, those of us here understand the work that we've engaged in has a religious and a theological lens. We are called to the work because God, we believe, somewhere is in the midst. The divine one is in the midst working. And so when I'm out on the line, it is very clear for me that I am doing holy work. To this season has been an interesting season. I mean, it has taken on quite. I mean, Black Lives Matter got started with a black man as president, the first black man to ever be president. That's some. Could somebody preach on that? If we could get a text or something other, that seemed like it'll preach. But so this has been an interesting season of both the work that I believe that has been gifted to us, but also there is a kind of, do I dare say, a malevolence, a mean spirit. Can I say this and y'all won't get mad at me? There's a evil, a devilish something afoot that's got me paying attention in ways that maybe I've never paid attention before. Now it could be that I'm nearing some ages and I'm getting older, so it could be that I could blame some of this on that, but there's something afoot. Dr. Bennett, could you lead off? Could you talk a little bit about, at least from your vantage point, what you're seeing?
Well, Doc, you put it in my lap, Doc. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. That's an easy one, and I do apologize from the jump not being able to stay on for the full discussion that I know my brothers are going to unpack that question in greater detail. But if I could frame it from my vantage point, you say politics are local. We commemorated Ma'afa this weekend. For those of you who don't know, that are viewing, that may not know, Ma'afa is a Kiswahili term which means the great calamity, the great suffering. It speaks about the journey that we traditionally call the Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade, where free people were snatched and negotiated away and conditioned to see themselves as inferior. And a part of that inferiority manifested in them not even being considered human enough to vote and to have their voice exercised. And that's since we've been in this country. The local manifestation for me in Bridgeport, I guess doesn't begin, but it manifests itself through faith acts. Over this weekend, the Ma'afa commemoration sought to tell the story of that history, the Ma'afa, where we were oftentimes considered so less than in our vote. And a part of that manifestation is all of the hurdles and obstacles that we had to go through just to utilize our voice, from how many beans in the jar to reading foreign languages, just to be able to have the opportunity to write. Those who couldn't do it themselves often use those tools to keep us. This weekend, we explored a little bit of that in poetry, dance, and vignette. And to cap it off, we engaged in voter registration, mobilization, and partnership with Faith Acts around, which is a group of clergy, predominantly Black and brown clergy, to register, to coordinate rides to the polls tomorrow. That is Faith Acts and what have you. I am blessed to pastor a congregation that will be 100 years next year, and has always had that civic kind of engagement in the hollow section of Bridgeport. The interesting thing, though, that helps me frame this conversation is not just my location of what we are practically doing for tomorrow, but its historical context. This past Friday in Harlem, New York, thousands of people gathered at the Abyssinian Baptist Church to celebrate the life of the Reverend Calvin Otis Butts III. Dr. Calvin Otis Butts was the pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. And many of the viewers may know his history. What may not be known is that of his roots in Bridgeport. His roots in Bridgeport, being raised there in Bridgeport, and his interesting history at the Mount Airy Baptist Church that I pastor, where he was raised during the summer times and spent a lot of his formative years at Mount Airy. His parents were actually married at Mount Airy in Bridgeport prior to his birth. I mention him because of his work around civil rights, what we call the social gospel. Just recently, in reflecting on his life, and I quote his words because I think it speaks to this conversation. He says, "Good religion ought to be in connection with common sense." And good religion and common sense says that power concedes nothing without the fight, as Frederick Douglass says, and people in power recognize organized people and organized money. And a part of what he has sought to do in his ministry and influence generations of us is to mix good religion with common sense. That if we want to make change on the local level, on the national level, a central part of that is voting. A central part of that is not just voting on election day, which some of us would say is comparable to the wedding day, but you got to be involved throughout the marriage. You got to be involved beyond that, and that is you got to be involved between election times. And so, he lived his life and public ministry in that way, and I want to honor him because though a preacher, one of the preachers of our Ma'afa said that people will watch you even though they won't give you credit, but they will watch what you do. And so there are many people who watched his style. There are many people who watch our styles, but won't give us and our methods, but won't give us credit for it. And listen, I'm not gonna let folks just talk while I'm dead. I'm gonna try to keep living while I'm alive. And around that is good religion. All right, whether it's the scripture that we believe in, the Christian scripture, or whether it's other sacred texts that says you got to mix that with the common sense that you got to use your voice, not just on election day, but you got to use your voice in between the elections. Dr. Butts did that eloquently in his way. And I think each of us are striving to do that from our spiritual lens. I want to say biblical lens, but I even want to go broader and say from our spiritual perspective. And so what I do, what I know you all do, is I do this as a sacred service. This is not separate and apart. On some level, I think Black folk understand and are growing to understand that that listen, God is not going to come from heaven to do this work for us. We've got to do it for ourselves, and God will give us the strength and the power to make these kind of connections. So that's man, I hope that frames what I've been seeking to do, what Mount Airy has done locally, and what we try to do through Connect and other forums statewide and nationally through the various platforms we have.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I believe it was Frederick Douglass who said it best. I prayed for 20 years, and nothing really happened. I'm paraphrasing. Until I started praying with my feet.
Yeah.
Right. Praying with my legs until I got in action. And so I believe, for me, faith, I think I'm in the book, faith without works. All right. I'm gonna stop preaching.
It's dead, Doc. I'll finish that sentence for you. It's dead.
Dead. Yes, sir.
Come on in the room, Dr. Wade, bro. Wade, talk to us, Pastor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bennett, for those wise words. I think, the greatest challenge that we face specifically, as clergy, as men of God, specifically as African Americans, is we've been so conditioned to look up, right? We see that right there as Jesus is making his way back to heaven, and his disciples, if you will, are gazing up at the sky. So much so that the angels have to come and say, hey, why are you sitting here gazing up at the sky? You need to be where he told you to be. And so too often we spend all of our energy looking up, failing to realize that the real work takes place in the earth. So there is this level of prayer that connects us to God, but that also pushes us to do the work in the earth. And that's where this voting takes place. This is where I've tried to say with our congregation, it's not enough just to show up on Sunday, to pray, to hope. All of those things are wonderful and all of those things are good. But at some point, you've got to move beyond the pews. You got to move beyond the pews, and you have to connect with people, right? You have to get engaged. You have to get involved. You have to know what the issues are, because the goal, if you will, of the enemy, whatever context you want to look at, is to keep you ignorant, right? To keep you locked into this notion that if you just vote, you've done all that's required. And so in that sense, then there is no sense of accountability or holding folk accountability once the vote is over. And this is how folk just show up in our communities right around election time. All of these events take place around election time, and then they disappear, right? They disappear. And so we made it a point not to allow that to happen in our context. One, if you're going to show up, we don't just want to see you during the election period, but we want to see you year round. And then we want to see you doing something, and we ought to be able to have courageous conversations with you, because to me, voting is an exchange. If I, in fact, vote for you, then there are some expectations that I have of you, right? You have to earn my vote. It is not just given to you. And so I've been challenged in this season in the work that I'm doing in the spaces that I hold. I kind of backed away a little bit because, some of the work we were doing, great work, but as soon as that election period happened, it's kind of like this press on you to start thinking a certain way and to moving a certain way. And I'm just resistant to that a little bit more, especially in light of all of the things that we've seen in our recent history, not just in our past history, but really in the last 7 to 10 years, which is reaffirming not only my faith, but also this understanding that we have to be knowledgeable about what we're doing, who we're electing, and then holding those individuals accountable, making sure the dollars hit our neighborhood. They don't just come into Waterbury and then die, but they never make their way to the North End where I serve folk. You follow what I'm saying? They never make their way to the community of people who I'm serving. And too often that's what happens, right? Money comes into the city, but it never makes it to the people who I care about, who I love outside of symbolic stuff, you know, a little bread here, a little bread there. And I'm not talking about no dollars. I'm talking about baskets and stuff like that. You feel what I'm saying? And I'll leave it at that at this point.
Yeah, that's a thing, Dr. Donaldson. I'm going to invite you into this conversation, but let me just stay right here for a second. The symbolics of a sign. They'll put a sign up, you know. They'll beautify. We'll have a nice. They'll spend money for a new little neighborhood. We call this neighborhood, you know, and then they'll run on that. And I asked folk, so you elected such and what? Because he was advocating change. What change have you felt in your neighborhood in the last? Okay, I'm gonna give you a year, 2 years, 3 years, and y'all gonna reelect somebody? Okay, I'm Dr. Donaldson. I know they don't do that where you're from. Could you have a word to say about what this sense of, I want to call maybe urgency that's coupled with a sense that there's something afoot, there's something stirring that we need to respond to. What is the Spirit doing?
Thank you, and thank you, Pastor Bennett and Pastor Wade for bringing us to this point in the conversation. For me, I entered the water, I think, a little bit differently. I think that the ideology behind white nationalism, which has really become white evangelical nationalism, has hijacked the conversation about faith. In particular, for those of us who are from the Christian tradition, they have hijacked the conversation about what does it mean to be a Christian in America. So for me, there's a sense of urgency to reclaim the narrative of what it means to be a person of faith altogether. Fundamentally, who is a person of faith and how does that person respond in community and in the commons, right? So it's not just what we do at the voting booth, but it is how we handle the least of these, how we handle the poor, the disenfranchised, the marginalized, right? Like, what is the real message of gospel? Where do we find good news? So I find an urgency to reclaim the name and reputation of faith in the global community, the name and reputation of Christianity in the global community, right? Like, there's an urgency for me to say that is not Christian. Anytime you oppress the poor, that is not Christian. Anytime you marginalize the disenfranchised, that is not Christian. Anytime you build walls and separate children at those walls from their parents, that is not Christian. Anytime you take your name and write it in gold on buildings in the center of town, that is more like Caesar than like Christ. It is the antithesis of what it means to be a follower of the teaching of Jesus. And then it's an opportunity for us to bear witness to what it does mean to be a Christian, right? And so it's an urgency for us to not only vote in a way that is emblematic of our faith, but then to behave in ways that build a more just and humane society, that work toward the uplift of our fellow siblings, that speak for those that have no voice, right? It's the opportunity for us to be on the ground in ways that we stopped being on the ground when the Word of Faith movement told us if we had a Mercedes, we had the favor of God. In ways that we stopped really being exemplars of our religious heritage because we had such a cruel optimism that made us think capitalism would work for us and that somehow one could be capitalist and Christian simultaneously, as if that's a thing. And so I think it's just an opportunity for us to reclaim really the center of the gospel narrative and to be what it is the church has always said the church is.
Lord have mercy. Okay. Reverend Pollock, you got to come in behind all of this. Go ahead and you got to come. They have offered a range here. That Christian nationalism, that Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, that shows up in dubious ways among Black and brown people. Let me just name that in ways that just is shocking to me. But okay, Reverend Pollock, go right ahead.
So just let me say this. I want to jump in, but I also know Reverend Bennett has to hit the road. So I don't know if he wants to have a last word before he takes off. And you're muted. Anthony, you're muted.
I'm ready to jump in. Let me just share this. I mean, my brothers have given it. Brother Pollock, I know you have great insight on this. I think there was never a time where white Christian nationalists was not at work in the American experiment. I think the challenge has always been, I think, is both Dr. Donaldson and Bishop Selders, you've talked about it. We've sort of veered away in the connection of capitalism and Christian faith commoditizing our faith, so that we sort of look away from what's beneath that. Dr. Otis Moss Jr., the elder of the Otis Moss, speaking from the text, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we will reap if we faint not. He talked about as you mentioned, Bishop Selders, almost like the genius orchestration of evil in this country right now that we're fighting against. It manifested itself in 1857 with Dred Scott. I mean, that's y'all home, right? So in the Dred Scott case, where of course, there was no right that the Black man had, that whites had to acknowledge or even adhere to. We've got to take that thread from there to where we are now. Dr. Moss would say there was never a time in American story where evil was not present. And so we had to learn how to do good. Our faith challenged us to do good in the presence of the evil. And so for me, the larger challenge, Brother Josh, that I wanted to just speak to, that the crux of this conversation is, how do we continue to keep the faith to do good, even when in Bridgeport and Waterbury and Seattle and the Hartford area, evil still persists, both institutionally in the government, and yet our challenge is still to get our people to do good, to get out to vote, to not just let that be the end, to stay engaged in whatever organization. To me, that's the call and that's the challenge. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you, Brother Bennett. We appreciate it, Doc. I just one last thing. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of my. Okay, I'm trying not to preach.
Dr. Donaldson, you better talk to him, Doc. He about ready to think it's convocation, Doc. He about ready to go to convocation, Doc.
He always ready to go to convocation.
Blessings on y'all.
All right, thank you, Brother Bennett. Brother Pollock, talk a little bit about what this framing, this setup has you thinking about and sitting with.
Yeah, so the other day I was listening to the radio and they did an interview with, I think his name is Russell Moore. He's a former Southern Baptist official, and he left his leadership position over their conversation on race and racism and their history of white supremacy. And he said something, I never quite heard it this way, but it made a lot of sense. He said, he called it Christian nationalism is liberation theology for white people. Christian nationalism is liberation theology for white people. And I said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that is talk about fraud, right? That is one of the most amazing frauds that is happening in our country right now. Is that through the very effective use of rhetoric and political grievance, white people have come to believe that they are somehow victims in this nation that was founded on white supremacy. Now, that is a fraud. And yet it has immense power. And the idea that the last election was stolen is part of that. And the idea that women's healthcare choices don't matter is part of that. And the idea that trans athletes can't run is part of that. It just goes on and on and on. And I think for me, that's the frightening thing about all this. And I think it's what you're talking about at the top of the hour, Bishop. There's something afoot, and it is this incredible grievance. And you get these dog whistles from these far-right politicians, and then suddenly people don't want CRT in the classroom in their local school, and they don't even know what it is. They have no idea what it is, and they don't want it. So we had a teacher in Southington who was just trying to be helpful and gave her students a list of terms that had to do with diversity and inclusion, and she gets brought up on charges that she's somehow violating the students' civil rights. But it's what do we do about that? And I think that's the question that we're struggling with. How do you counter this feeling of grievance that so many white people, and of course we mentioned earlier, some people of color also glom onto that, but so many white people are feeling in the country right now. And I think Dr. Bennett is right. This has always been operative in the nation, but there's something about the way it's showing up in politics right now that is frightening. I'll say this and then I'll stop. There's something about our consistency in terms of how we act in the public arena that cannot falter. So we have to be anti-racist in the public arena. We have to be for immigrants' rights in the public arena. We have to be for women's rights and women's healthcare rights in the public arena, as nuanced as that conversation needs to be. We cannot falter now. Rodney knows we're working on tax reform in Connecticut. The rich get away with paying so little in terms of the percentage of their income compared to low-income people. It is abhorrent, and we have to be consistent. We have to stay in that struggle until we fix that problem. And then, as we were saying earlier, as revenues rise in response to that struggle, we have to invest them properly. We have to invest them in the right places. We need to make sure that the income that the state gets goes to where it's really needed, not to angry white people who feel like victims when they're not.
When they built this doggone thing in the first place.
Right.
Let's really tell the truth. And I'm with you that it is not no more shrinking back into the recesses of our separate spaces. They come right in the center of commerce. Let's come right in the center of public discourse and debate and say that's a lie. And let me tell you here, let me name the reasons why. This is so very, the whole enterprise, and this white settler colonialistic racist enterprise was founded on the trafficking of human cargo for money making. What are you talking about? And to now try to lump that all together in a frame, saying that somehow it's divisive to name critical race theory, which is, you don't even know what it is. We've already said that, but more importantly, it's a legal term. You don't even know. Shut up. Stop talking about what you don't know anything about. And to have people enter into these conversations claiming an offense when you are offensive by your very some of what you stand for is so offensive to so many of us, and yet we've learned how to make brick with no hay for so long. We've compromised in so many ways. I've been one to say no, not anymore. What we've been working on, we've been trying to work on just taxes in this state since I arrived here 22 years ago.
That's right.
We've been trying to talk about balanced budgets and what do we do with our money, and how do the wealthy in this time where we have these rising prices. It's fascinating to me in this political season, in this election season, that we're talking about money. We're talking about the rising costs. We're talking about the economy. The wealthiest are making even more money. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk and others. They're not losing a penny. Right. So what are we really talking about? And how in what ways does our spiritual fortifying of ourselves play a part in this moment? Because we better get ready. Get ready. Anybody else got anything to say around this? I see you gnawing at the bit, Dr. Donaldson. I see you.
Well, I think that what Reverend Pollack brings up, and what you then kind of circle back around to, is what we're really dealing with is a moment of blacklash, right? That whenever there is Black progress in America, right, there is always a re-emergence of a white supremacist narrative. And I think we can't have this conversation about spiritual fortification until we talk about the need to deconstruct whiteness and the need to deconstruct the idea of normativity, right? Because it is a white theologic that has allowed what you talked about with stolen land. It starts with this narrative of manifest destiny, stolen land, and then stolen labor. And then from stolen land and stolen labor, capitalism just goes on. We talk about the original sin of America being slavery. Well, no, there's a sin of America that predates slavery. It's called imperialism. Imperialism opens the door for slavery. Slavery is the fruit of imperialism. And I think until we deal with the interlocking systems of oppression, we can't really fortify ourselves spiritually to deal with what is indeed systemic spirituality. There is an American spirituality, and it is systemic racism, it is capitalism, it is imperialism, it is cis heteropatriarchy, and it is anti-Blackness. Let's name that. And that's a spiritual climate that we have to come against and work through and wrestle through and teach through, but also demand the end of, right? It's not a compromise. Let's just take some ground or cede some. No. We have to demand the abolition of these systems in order for us all to be free. And I think the idea of beloved community, right, and being rooted in beloved community is the springboard from which we begin to really do that work. But I just wanted to lift up that there are some systemic things that we have to name in order for us to really move forward.
I like that naming. For me, it's extremely important to talk about if we're gonna talk. We have to talk about we call it reparations, right? Restitution. How do we make things right? And in an environment when to name a truth that this country was founded on stolen land and stolen people, all of a sudden people get their feelings hurt, and not just their feelings hurt, they do all kinds of stuff never to talk of it again, right? And then they then create narratives by which you then somehow or another are supposed to, you're doing the wrong thing by just naming what is the truth, and you want to ask the question, well, am I wrong with naming the actual truth that colonialism and white supremacy and empire drove what we now call the American democratic project? It's the undergirding of all there is. It is for me. It is the unfree, teasing out all of these things that actually call for me spiritual renewal. It is naming. We're going to be calling for every congregation that we're involved with and have some relationship with to begin to have reparation conversations. All right. I don't care what kind of space and place you're in. You ought to be talking about what does it mean to make it right. Come on, brother. Pastor Wade, jump in here, man.
Well, I think it's our thank you, Dr. Donaldson and Bishop. It's our formulation of our spirituality. When we think about exegesis, when we think about hermeneutics, right? How we are rightly dividing, right? And our perception of truth out of this hermeneutic, right? So white supremacy says, from a standpoint of hermeneutic, that having slaves is okay, but then the person who is a slave says, no, this is not God's good intent for me to be in slavery. And so now what we have, even in our pulpit, specifically, oftentimes amongst Black clergymen, who are afraid to name or to change their hermeneutic because all they know is a European-centric, if you will, idea of theology. And so everything that they carry is this notion of the Bible, but on certain things in the Bible, hey, I don't want to subscribe to that. You follow what I'm saying? I can't subscribe to when Paul tells, Philemon to go back to his master. I can't subscribe to that. You understand what I'm saying? And so we get locked sometimes into these arguments, even amongst ourselves as African-American clergy, around what is rightly dividing the word of truth, specifically if we try to add any Afrocentric, if you will, construct around the text. And so I think that becomes the challenge. And so when people such as myself, as Bishop Selders, as Reverend Pollock try to bring these conversations into the public sphere, it always turns back to a conversation of let's pray about it versus no, how do we actively call out these truths about we are here because of this, and how in many ways the sacred text added to our calamity. And that's rightly dividing the word of truth, right? And so those are the challenges that we're facing even today as we begin to break out of some of these curses around what is, as Dr. Donaldson said, what is Christian? What is biblical? What is the text actually saying as it relates to people who look like me and who look like you? But the text causes us to wrestle with those things. But the reality is many of those who are operating in this kind of theological nationalism, they don't want to wrestle with that, with that. And so it's easier to say the Bible is right versus, well, maybe not in that area. You understand what I'm saying? And so I think that's the challenge that we face.
Well, so for me, now this is just for me. I think there is something that is spiritually active that transcends any written work, Bible included. Now I know I'm getting ready to get into some trouble here. All right, I'm getting some trouble here, but I believe I'm on good ground because before there ever was a Bible, there was God, and in your Bible, we name the person who is attributed to have written the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy to Moses. the 5 books of Moses, when in fact, y'all know Moses wasn't even born. Okay, in the beginning was God, right? I was told to leave my thinking outside of the church. That was what I was told, and I believe that was not spiritually minded. That was engineered to keep us. That was culturally minded. That ain't white supremacy. That kind of control stuff. That's something else. All right. So once I started to think, and I started to, now you want to quote some scripture, rightly divide. I started to bring my mind to it. Some stuff just didn't work. Didn't work in my frame of reference anymore. So for me, I believe there is a conversation that we can have that talks about what I think are spirit. As a Black person, I grew up in the Pentecostal tradition. My people spoke in tongues. My people clapped their hands, stomped their feet, all that stuff. We try to quote scripture about it. But if we quote the scripture about praise ye the Lord, that was Jews. They didn't do it like Africans do it. But I can take you right to some spaces and places in Africa right now, and you would think you was in a Pentecostal holiness tradition, and they're practicing spirituality like Yoruba or Igbo, right? That for us, we've infused what we've always known about ourselves, what we've always known about our life, and our life cycle is a day and a night and a day again. The ancient Egyptians taught us that. So that you hear what I'm saying. I'm starting to get I'm turned all the way up right now. I'm turned all the way up, brother, because I think here's how we need to unpack some of this stuff so that we can get to the spirit work that is all of ours to do. That's all of ours to do, and it's ours to do daily. Now we just got a few minutes. We got election tomorrow. And I want to connect what we've been talking about to this practice, I believe, of democracy. I heard one person say it like this: the choices we got are limited. But I do declare, when you don't participate, you leave it up to whatever the people who are participating. You leave it up to them to make the decisions for you. And I declare, for me, it is not going to happen. I'm going to vote my ticket. That's what Howard Thurman said. Vote your ticket, and that's the way old people used to say it. I'm going to vote my ticket. And I believe there are spaces and places here in Connecticut. We have a ballot initiative that is asking folk to let's tell our state legislature, y'all get it together and let's come on into the 20th and the 21st century and get early voting done. Yeah. Right now, here in the state of Connecticut, we are one of 4 states that doesn't do early voting, Dr. Donaldson. I know out there in Washington State, y'all been voting for a while. Y'all mail in the votes. It's all kind of stuff. Half the folk done already voted. Here in Connecticut, we wait for this 18-hour period one day or Tuesday, right? And we are on a list with New Hampshire, Alabama, and Mississippi. I want to come off that list as soon as I can get it. Let's come off that list right there.
I don't even think we have 18 hours.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's not even 18 hours. It's less than that.
That's exactly right. We vote from 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening.
Yeah, I think it's 14 hours.
It's 14 hours. And so I think and the arguments to not do it are lodged in where there's a danger when we open up the state constitution. What lunacy! But that's the narrative that's stoked up here in liberal New England. That's what they say. So we have that ballot initiative. We have the opportunity for this legislative session. Pastor Wade, Reverend Pollock, we have here in Connecticut, we have this opportunity, really, if we get this thing right, to go for some big stuff. Right? We could go for some big stuff. This stuff about the budget and taxation, you know, let's right the wrongs that have traditionally held on to the fact that people who have money make more money, you know, and then get to keep a greater percentage of the money that they do make, you know, because taxes, you know, are fair, right? Taxation is fair. Right? Okay.
So, Bishop, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to do what the politicians say. I'm going to vote my conscience. You understand what I'm saying? And I think for me, that's what we need to be teaching people to do. Vote your conscience. You know, turn on them what they turn on you, right? You send them there, they say they're going to support it, then they get there, and they say, well, I just had to vote my conscience. You follow what I'm saying? And it end up being something totally different. I think every year we have this conversation about, man, we can do some big things. Specifically here in Connecticut, when primarily, you know, Democrats control. But the bottom line is, do they have the courage to do? You know, and to me, that's where the real work takes place. You know, this election is problematic for me. I got to be honest. I am torn in so many ways because I'm struggling with this notion of the lesser of two evils. I'm really wrestling with that in every sense of the way. And my mind says do this, but my heart is saying enough is enough. You understand what I'm saying? Enough is enough. And so we have to figure out a way to really put pressure on folks, you know, and is this our come to Jesus moment, if you will, right? Is this our last stand where we say, hey, you know, if you will, to use your term, vote your ticket, but if folk don't do what they're supposed to do when you get in there, can we continue to do that? And that's what I'm wrestling with. I got to be honest. Can we continue to do that? Because that doesn't seem to be a winning formula from where I'm sitting. Just keeping it 100.
Let's keep it 100. And I say, then we work actively to hold you accountable. One. And two, when you show us who you are, let's vote you out of there and get somebody else in there, right? And that's what I have been in favor of. These 20 some odd years we've lived here in Connecticut, because I walked into a situation where, you know, folk was voting crazy. I mean, you know, change you can believe in. When there was a white dude, I mean, in these chocolate towns, and they all white dudes that's mayors of these towns. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, and then I hear brothers and sisters, black and brown people saying, oh, you know, and unseat an incumbent colored man, gay, queer man who works at the margins. He was bringing some marginal stuff to the table. He was talking about folk on the margins, and here in Hartford, he got defeated by the white boy who had money. And got reelected. I'm just saying, I know what that difficulty is. And when I say that, then people say, Bishop, you oughtn't say that too loud. Well, I'm just calling a thing a thing. Alan Van Zandt said, you just call a thing a thing.
Might I add that I think what happens to progressives is that elections rally us, and then we go back into our silos. Conservatives and those who are anti the democratic process organize for the long run. We are seeing now the results of the moral majority. We are seeing now the results of men like Falwell. We are seeing results of the DeVos family, right? Like, we want to talk about Betsy, but we don't want to talk about her father-in-law, who was the co-founder of Amway. Like, this is long, deep money. And it's planned for multiple decades and multiple generations. Progressives don't have a plan for multiple decades and we don't have a strategy for multiple generations, because election time comes and we get fired up,
Mhm.
and then we spend every waking moment between election cycles figuring out who we're going to cancel. Because I don't want to work with you because you didn't get my pronouns right. And I don't want to work with you because you didn't celebrate Kwanzaa. And I don't want to work with you because when I came to the Jewish temple in the synagogue and you didn't let me sit in the front row. And I don't want to, like, the ways in which our internal disorganization disorients us. It keeps us from long-range progress. So, Pastor Wade, I am with you. I'm fed up voting for a party that thinks that they are owed our votes, led by people who want to tell us that we are not Black if we don't vote for them. The brazen audacity and the hubris and arrogance of that kind of thinking challenges me. I mean, if we're keeping it 100. And what I do know is we've not organized our way into a better alternative.
That's right.
We've not formed coalitions across petty aisles that will move us into positions of power, because we are very, very naive as it relates to how power really works.
Yeah.
And I would have to agree that power works in specific ways, right? And it works in specific ways. I mean, Saul Alinsky said it best: organized money and organized people is one way to think about that, right? One simple way to think about that.
Yeah.
And in many of these instances, we've been round and round and round about this taxation and a just budget conversation. The low 20 some odd years I've been here in Connecticut, we've been around that hamster wheel because we haven't found a way to work coalitionally to even understand what coalition building actually means. All right. And then to do it, that we simply, and Pastor Wade and Reverend Pollock understand this specifically when I'm getting ready to say, we watched it, that then deals, you think you're in the room working in a coalition, building across a broad spectrum, and then folk cut the deal to get theirs. They celebrate it and leave you in the dust hanging.
Yeah.
And then when you say something on it, you're being divisive about it. Well, I think it's time to call that and to call that out, and then to require that if you want our vote, if you want real change, there are ways to do it, and it don't take rocket scientists to figure this formula out. What's going to help our people or is access to jobs, access to better living conditions and housing, access to health care. I mean, these are basic stuff. You know, you want to talk about the economy. Yes, I want to talk about the economy. All right. But in order to do that, the profit can't be the start off of that. Profit can't be that. So let's have those broad-based conversations where not just you win, all right?
Yeah.
Not just you and your Pookie and Ray Ray, not just you and your nephew and your niece, but that that a larger group of us actually get benefit.
But that's the big payoff, though. You know, that's the big payoff. You know, largely when we think about, you know, conservatives, they really only have like maybe 4 principles. And then everything else is built off of that, and they hammer that over and over and over. You know, typically when you're hearing that conversation, you clear about what they stand for. But typically when you hear progressives, we everywhere. You know, we everywhere. We're not clear about what it is that we need, except for we need something, right? And so if talking about coalition, we all come to the table, how they begin to divide, they say, hey, you get something and you get something and you get something. And so we all become torn because we're trying to get our little piece of heaven, failing to realize when we do that, we're losing, as Dr. Donaldson said, the long game. You follow what I'm saying? Or we spend years trying to convince folk who will never be convinced about our trajectory. To me, that's a fool's game, right? Conservatives don't try to convince progressives about the direction that they're trying to go. They could care less what we think about it, but progressives spend too much time thinking that the way forward is to try to convince conservatives that our ideas are great. And I just think that's a lost cause. And that's some of the prevailing, if you will, instruction that's coming out now. We're not talking to the right people, the people we need to be talking about. No, we need to be talking to each other and raising our level of influence beyond just, as Dr. Donaldson said, the election season.
Yeah.
You know, the day that we tell politicians is not about the elections, but it's about how you vote, not how we vote. Then we'll start to see the change that we really need.
Amen.
Yeah. The power we talking about is in raw numbers. At the end of those decisions that are made by those policymakers, they say 172 to 113. The yeas have it. It's raw numbers, y'all.
Yeah.
It's raw numbers. You want to talk about power? It is mathematics. And what I'm calling for, and I'm talking to a lot of people, you know, when we talk about this election stuff, when we talk about power, and when we talk about the vote, when we talk about all of this, it's a numbers game. Power actually is embedded in a political sense in the numbers. It's and I'm with you, Pastor Wade. It ain't about talking to the right. It's how many numbers can we count? What's the arithmetic? 1 + 1 is 2. 2 + 2 is 4. Can we multiply the arithmetic? I'm not trying to be crass, but it is simple numbers. And the fact of business is, if you're not counting, I mean, in all of the ways in which we have to count to attribute how we gain power and build power, if we're not talking about that, then you don't have me in the conversation any longer, because you're just trying to get what you need to get. And if we're gonna do that, I'm gonna try to get what I need to get for me and mine and the people I represent, right? And so let's go. And so the folk I'm representing, the folk you represent, the folk that Josh is representing, the folk that ED you representing, we gonna just, there we are, all right? And we gonna do some, I got 15, you got 13, you got 12, you got 10. Okay, we need 187. Let's go to work. Reverend Josh, you ain't said nothing in a while.
Yeah, I'm really digging the conversation, though. I'm thinking about my message on Sunday, and my guess is people are going to be upset. I'm trying to stay positive about the outcome of the election, but I think we've seen the polling, right? We've seen the predictions, and it's going to be a different landscape unless there's some kind of miracle. And what that means is my liberal/progressive, mostly white spiritual community, they're going to be upset. They're going to be sad. They're going to be mourning. They're going to be grieving. And I gotta respond to that. I have to acknowledge that people are upset, but I'm not going to let them stay there, because there's just too much work to do. And I think we've been talking about the long game and community organizing and the numbers. And I want my people ultimately to hear that message, that just because this election went bad, assuming it goes bad from their perspective, doesn't mean the game is over. And that's one truth. The game has never been over. The struggle has never been over. And we do have, I think there is a lot in Connecticut in the coming years that can be really positive for all the residents of the state. And I want to keep people focused on that. So I think I'm going to call my sermon Sending Forth. And I'm going to ask them, why do you come to church? And they have a lot of reasons, I'm sure. But if they don't come to be sent forth, then they're missing something. That's my message.
All right. Thank you. We coming to the close now, Reverend Wade. We coming to the close. What's your closing word?
I think, the gospel narrative is, for me, especially in this context, is John 1:14, and the word became flesh and it dwelt among us. There's a translation, I believe it's the Message version, where it says, and the word became flesh and it joined the neighborhood. It came into the neighborhood. It became a part of the neighborhood. And I think ultimately that's our response as clergy persons, clergymen, clergy women. Somehow we have to take this narrative of the gospel and it has to become a part of our community, not just something that happens on Sunday, but something that happens and impacts every day of the lives of the people who we are charged to oversee, if you will. And if we can't get to that place where we, as Reverend Josh said, compel people to go forth, right? That is not enough just to come to church, but you, as John 1:14 says, you must become the church. And how we become the church is by connecting, being relational, understanding that our prayers must take feet and that we must participate in our deliverance. There is no deliverance without your participation. The children of Israel do not cross the Red Sea if they don't want to walk. You understand what I'm saying? And so the pie in the sky by sounds good, but at the end of the day, we are required to do the work in the earth. And so we do that through voting, but not just through voting. We do that by offering our energy, our intellect, our service to help our communities be better. And so I think that's the challenge. That's the message going forward. I may even steal Josh's message, just make it a little blacker. You understand what I'm saying? You're picking up what I'm putting down. I'm just playing, but y'all get my point. I'll close with that.
Dr. Donaldson.
This has just been a delight and really water to my soul. My thinking is centered in Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good and what doth the Lord require of you, but to do justice. Justice doesn't happen, justice is done. To love mercy and to walk humbly. So while we're walking and while we're loving, it is most important that we stay in the doing until the kingdoms of this world is become the kingdom of our Lord and of our Christ, and the reign of God is forever.
Wow. Okay.
Amen.
That was a little preachy, little churchy preachy on it. Let me say to the three of you, and then to Dr. Bennett as well, who had to leave, that I appreciate you very much for joining me tonight in this conversation. We got lots more work to do, and I've committed. And by the way, I got to do one shout out tonight. I got to shout out my beloved Pamela Seldis. Thank you very much for being my co-partner and in life and in this work. We're in it to win it together. I needed to shout her out tonight specifically, and I appreciate you, baby. There's no way we can do this in isolation on an island by ourselves. And I'm pretty blessed to at least do this kind of work, not just here in my own town and of course in the state of Connecticut, but Dr. Donaldson and I serve on several different boards in a national way. We do this work together, and we do it in collaboration with. Sometimes we do it fighting one another, but not fighting each other with enmity. We're fighting each other because I think my idea is better than your idea, and I'm gonna win. I'm gonna try to get, like brothers and sisters, like siblings do, because what we do know is when we win, we all win, huh? And what I know is if you are in the struggle, ultimately we're going to win. Here's my message tonight. As we go into this, as we at least hear now, because today now these days, you call the polls closed, but you know the election is gonna still go on for a while because it's, you know, that's the way they do it now. These elections now, for the last 20 years, we've been counting votes and hanging chads, and you know we've been doing that for the last 20 plus years. 2000 we had hanging chads, right? So it now these days seems like elections last for seasons, for a season or two. But here's my word, my parting word: weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. That there is to everything under the heavens, there's a time, there's a season, there's a purpose. And I believe we've been called, like, you know, the uncle told his niece, you've been called to the king's court for such a time as this. So I like the fact that we got to do a little justice while we walk humbly, you know, while we love mercy. I believe we got to invest in the doing in our legs and in our feet, and not just praying in our hearts and in our souls. It is ordained for us, beloveds, that we be engaged in the real work that calls for us not just to be, but to act in ways that are loving, not just the ways in which any family can do for you and yours, but that we do for the family, the greater, larger family. They're hurting people all over the region. They're hurting people all over the world. And so my solidarity, our solidarity, have to be, you know, connected to the solidarity of the folk in Brazil who just fought and defeated somebody that I think was way wrong in Brazil, or that our struggle is connected to the work that's happening all over Africa, where the civil wars are going on, where the legacy of colonialism and white supremacy has left Africa torn asunder. We've got to be a part. Our solidarity has to be with the people who are struggling day for day to connect. Our solidarity has to be connected to the folk who are in Southeast Asia, who we don't hear about, but their struggle is mighty. Hallelujah. The struggle is mighty. And as I take the time to find where those struggle places are, where those least of these are, Jesus said it best. I like the way Jesus said it. What you've done to the least of these, you've done it to me, right? And that's the witness that I think we bring to bear. I go to the polls to be a witness, to participate in this here, whatever this thing is. I go there to participate in it, and not be idly by, standing on the sidelines. I am advocating for our action and our activity. Thank you, my brothers in this work. Appreciate you very much. We're gonna be back at it on. Listen, I tell people all the time, we lead an organization. Pamela and I lead an organization called Moral Monday, CT, Connecticut. When you think we're gonna do stuff? Maybe on a Monday, maybe on a Monday, maybe on a Monday. So we'll be back at it. We'll have some, probably next week. We'll spend a little time doing some. y'all. I played bid whist. I minored it in college, bid whist, and so I minored in it. I played a lot of whist. Took me a little while to go to school and everything, but we used to call it after whist. You know, the chumps would always want to talk about what it woulda, coulda, shoulda. Well, didn't. you went to Boston. And those of you who are card players, y'all know that's a reference to, y'all know exactly what I'm talking about right here. I appreciate you all. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate the numbers of you who are on tonight. And I ask you very much to prayerfully consider some of what you've heard tonight, and do your best to participate, and to get active and to engage your passions. Thank you all. Thank you all again. And we'll talk at you real soon. Peace.